All right. So yeah, just that quick disclaimer. I don't find it productive to place distinctions between specifically talking around art practice or design or language. I view them all as sort of one messy container for me. Um, my practice and my attention kind of spanned a variety of different modes of making and working methods, but today I specifically want to talk about graphic design practice under the context of like publication design and also some visual identity projects. And also kind of talk, I want to spend a little bit of time at the end to talk about my relationship to research, information management, and like ideas around like technologic autonomy, having some agency in this fast changing tech world, especially as a designer, I think is really crucial. So yeah, let's get into things. I'm going to preface with just some notes about myself and how I kind of got here and what my trajectory looked like. And then I'm going to show some case studies. I would love to have a more sort of conversational dialogue sort of format if you're all willing to chat with me during some of these project case studies. And then, yeah, we can have a Q&A at the end. So first, yeah, just giving another clause about the idea of like intelligence or how I view intelligence or like knowledge. I think I operate from a position of like consistently not knowing things and not necessarily being in spaces of like having a wealth of knowledge. I have historically kind of thrived and also survived navigating a lot of these systems to find out what I need to find out. I didn't necessarily, I didn't get my degree in my undergraduate degree in design. I've learned from practicing in the field. And I think all of these sort of things that contributed to my trajectory, they show up as values in the work and like, yeah, sort of bolster my general ethos about practicing design. Um, so yeah, a note about education. I've largely practiced design outside of formal academic design models. I've generally had a not the best time inside of more structured academic, like college sort of spaces, studying design. I've had some incredible mentors inside and outside of the classroom, though, and I think the big takeaway there is that community and like a few people can be vastly more kind of important and fruitful to someone's upbringing than like a notable curriculum at some school program or something. I think people are really what hold the power, and I think people are a large part of graphic design practice too. Yeah. Uh, my sort of perspective on life and design and art are also informed by a sort of interdisciplinary, like DIY and countercultural background, and also informed by my lived experience of Blackness and gender nonconformity. Um, yeah, I also grew up skateboarding as a kid, and that was like that kind of gave me my first taste of creative agency, I guess. And yeah, I think learning kind of having that as a skill and sort of confidence and independence sort of builder when I was younger really put me in a situation to be receptive and open-minded, especially also things that I think are really important for a graphic designer. Yeah, so keeping all that in mind, we'll jump into books first. I have a couple book projects to share with you all, and then we'll show some visual identity projects. And yeah, just feel free to also jump in and call out if you want to engage or talk about something a bit more. So
Hey, Rush.
I think it's helpful.
I
Yeah,
was just gonna say, maybe I'll make a suggestion then, since you can't see people very easily. But if someone wants to
right.
jump in, if they raise their hand, then I'll kind of let you know that someone wants to come in with a question. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah,
Cool.
thank you. Cool. So kind of thinking about this relationship between all of my projects and sort of the sort of research aspects of them, I picked out a couple projects that I found interesting. I think research is a funny word. I think it can mean a lot of different things. I let's jump into the first project. So this first book was the New Black Vanguard, which was published in 2019. One of my first bigger book design projects at the time. I was a senior in undergrad, finishing up my senior thesis, a painting show I was working on, and like working through that body of work, but also was starting a really sort of fruitful and kind of really formative relationship with a designer and colleague of mine, now very close friend, Mark Owens. Mark is another independent designer based in Philly. He's made many art books and sort of arts and cultural sort of publications for museums and organizations, artist monographs, etc. And he came to me with the New Black Vanguard project and reached out to me to work on it as a coworker or as a co-designer with him. And so through that process, we got to know each other and had a very sort of conversational, non-hierarchical, sort of horizontal working relationship, something that I think I've really cherished and also kind of try to emanate in my teaching and also when I work with other designers and also like in my own mentorship sort of relationships. But this is the New Black Vanguard. It's a book it's a survey of contemporary photographers throughout the African diaspora, kind of working in photography in a more commercial, fashion-based sort of context. And the editor, Antoine Sargent, this was their sort of publication debut, was interested in articulating a sort of connection between these makers like making in a fashion sort of commercial context now to like contemporary photography movements throughout like the last maybe 100 years or so. Thinking of like a studio practice like James Van Der Zee in Harlem or Malik Sidibe or Seydou Keita. And yeah, just tying those connections, I mean, also just even starting with a comparison on Frederick Douglass, which I think is really interesting. Here are some of the images. Here are some of the work in progress images from that time period. A lot of these working sessions, we were kind of thinking through and talking through how to make a book that can, I guess, sort of aid in sort of making these artists more accessible in like an art sort of lens, but without sort of watering down their message or like, sort of almost maybe like erasing parts of their story. So we were thinking of a visual language that could carry some weight without, influencing the meaning, which I think is tough. And I think we landed on color being the main system that color and material being the main system that like really operates throughout the book. Here are some sketches. These typefaces didn't actually end up being the final outputs, but here's another sketch too. This was in my undergrad studio while I was working on my painting thesis. So yeah, this was a really exciting time for me. I think the research in this project was largely, it helped to have like knowledge around like contemporary African, like especially like post-colonial African photography movements. But also like the research came from lived experience in this example. I think I had a sort of unique perspective and sort of relationship with a lot of these artists. It was about maybe 15 artists featured in the project, and I think I knew of maybe most, if not all of them, before the project, and have maybe like met or are friends with like a few of them before that, and like these are relationships that largely started through like social media platforms when I was younger, like sites like Tumblr or something like that, where a lot of like Black creatives were sharing like film photography and a lot of their art sort of projects and content and stuff like that, as was I. So it was just really cool to also just like grow up with a lot of these artists and also kind of experience some of their upbringing and some of the story kind of being told in person, and also think about how to match a sort of visual identity or a sort of look or a system to this project. And yeah, Mark and I did that with yeah, relying on color and material for the book. And also we used a typeface by a I believe she's a French designer, Margot Levique, who gave us an early version of her typeface, Romy, which became the sort of end product. Here's some of the interior shots of the New Black Vanguard. It has a beautifully written sort of introductory essay, again, sort of tying larger sort of photographic practices with like historical references, like painting figures like Barclay L. Hendricks. Beyonce is referenced once or twice, which I think is always interesting. Yeah. It was a really exciting project, and it also just was the sort of start of me kind of getting to a place where I can see how design can really aid community-centric projects. This was definitely like a huge affirmation in that sort of regard. So yeah, the book has some interviews in the back, which are on really colorful, sort of uncoated paper. And then we sort of bounce between these matte paper moments with like the glossy photographic sort of finishes. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful book. I think it really encapsulates a moment. And yeah, and these photos are by Brianne Furlong. And so, yeah, that was 2019. During that time, I was working in Philly. I just was working through my senior year, then just graduated. So was working in Philly. I got a studio for a bit after graduating. And then fast forward, I moved to New York, became acquainted with one of my closest sort of colleagues, and also just like a family member, Jerome Harris. And we did this book together in 2020, Black Women in the Vote. This is, yeah, the front cover and back cover. It's a sort of it's a perfect bound, like soft cover book with like it's at a good scale, maybe like 9.5 by like 11. And it has like a sort of floppy workbook feel to it. Yeah, this project started off with the editor of the Baltimore African American, which is also the oldest Black African American media company in the country. They reached out to me, and I recruited Jerome to work on the book with me. And the sort of context around the project was, the 2020 elections were kind of around the corner. And there was like this moment in culture last 2 years ago now. Wow. I'm sure you all may remember being overseas, but there was a moment in culture when we were really talking about like the role of Black women in the American voting system historically. Like that kind of popped back up into the sort of American zeitgeist. And so this project felt like it was great timing to release it. And also like the Afro has been sitting on over 100 years of like photographic content, like all this archival material that, yeah, they've been compiling that has been sort of maybe published in newspapers, but never just shown kind of together in a collection. So that's what this book was kind of aiming to do. So yeah, it was really exciting because we got to work with like material from, in some cases, over 100 years, like in the past. And yeah, getting to work with material that has the power to sort of rewrite positively, like to, yeah, do sort of a reparative gesture on history. yeah, I think most Americans know, and a lot of folks overseas know also the women's suffrage movement in America was largely a movement around white suffragist rights. So it's also just great to see a project that could encapsulate all the sheer work that was going on outside of what was being written down and recorded in the mainstream. And now that, you know, that work now has a chance to sort of be amplified. And so, yeah, this is some of the photos you can see here. You can even see like almost like this kind of like the notation or like some of the pre-computer photography sort of like fixing that's happening here with the gray marker. Um, they're trying to get like a good sort of like tonal value, sort of contrast ratio happening. So when you convert it down to like half tones or like however they print it, you can get a faithful, reproduced, like legible image. And I think the traces of that are really exciting. They almost, yeah, they have this gorgeous, almost like ghostly feel to them. Like folks almost look like they have a halo around them in a lot of cases. Um, yeah. And so, yeah, we also made some sort of like social graphics for this project. And the typeface here is also a sort of exciting extension of our thinking, Jerome and I. We used a typeface from a foundry out here in the States called Vocal Type Co. Started by Trey Seals, and they've been producing retail typefaces that are kind of hooked into a larger sort of historical and like social, like, yeah, different historical and social initiatives. And so this typeface is called Carrie. It's like a name, like Carrie. It's got this little flare on the L that was specifically kind of popping up in a lot of white suffragist movement, like poster signage, protests, sort of like, yeah, physical sit-ins and movements and stuff like that. And I thought, yeah, I thought it would be a sort of interesting conversation to almost bring that symbol back kind of into play, but under a different context. That's something I kind of like to do a lot across projects, a sort of cultural exchange or seeing what sort of chemical reactions happen when you put, yeah, different things with different sort of historical or social context next to each other. I think that's also the large power of like creating language, of image making. Yeah, and then we used for the serif, this was Freight Text Pro, which is a serif by Joshua Darden, a black type designer. He runs a foundry now, it's Darden Studio. So yeah, I think one thing in my practice that pops up again and again is a sort of like mindfulness towards ethics and the sort of social implications of these things. Like, and I think that often comes down to me being very mindful of like, okay, what typeface am I using? Like, what are the sort of implications of using a typeface like this? Or, yeah, what is that historical tale or like lineage that I'm making? Or like, what are those dots that I'm trying to connect? Sometimes it's always fun, I think, also to not be too prescriptive and let form be form with fonts. And not get too sort of bogged down. But then there's times also, I think, when a typeface can be of great aid to a communication strategy. Yeah, so this next project is my newest book design. It's called In the Black Fantastic, released by Thames and Hudson a little bit ago, maybe a couple months ago now. It was edited by a British Ghanaian curator and writer, Echo Eshin. I'm not sure if y'all have heard of Hayward Gallery, but it was also, the show was released in, or the book was released in conjunction with a group show at the Hayward, also called In the Black Fantastic. So sort of similar setup to the New Black Vanguard, curator, writer, articulating a sort of new way to look at art or sort of pop culture movements, specifically to in the Black Fantastic. Echo is trying to essentially like assemble this vast gallery of like Black cultural production across different forms. A lot of them very accessible forms, like album artwork and like popular books, like Octavia Butler books and things like that. Um, and yeah, things like the movie Get Out and stuff like that. Um, and like kind of bringing all of these like different sort of like constellations together under the guise of like a sort of new way to look at it, calling it the Black Fantastic, almost like using the lens of Afrofuturism, but also like a bit of magic realism to help us get to that place of articulation. But yeah, it's an exciting sort of thesis where a Juliana Huxtable work can live, and also like Sun Ra album art and like Flying Lotus album artwork, and yeah, like popular television. Let me show you a little bit of the inside. So I think this was also exciting because there was this sort of like, there was this quality we were trying to get out of the book also, especially thinking about the references across time and history, like a lot of Afrofuturist ideas in here. And my head tends to lean toward solutions that feel like sort of non-linear, kind of dynamic or in flux or yeah, kind of interchangeable or something like that. And I've been, ever since I got into book design, I've always seen content pages as interesting sites of possible intervention. And I think this is maybe an early instance or like the first instance of me kind of playing with the table of contents format, essentially almost making like something that feels cyclical, but you can still kind of essentially navigate through it. Things have proximity to their circular like chapter nodes. But yeah, it almost starts to feel like a clock or a sort of pattern or a border. And I think that gets really sort of exciting. Yeah. And here's here's like some of the work. This is an example. Like you can see stills of like Get Out living with fine art photography and like album art cover artwork. Really exciting, interesting juxtapositions of like different sources of media from different times. Also like painters like Robert Reed, for example, who's a big favorite of mine. And yeah, I think yeah, this project was very research heavy, but I also think I was lucky enough to have a solid foundation in like Black contemporary art, and being a painter myself. I've been obsessed with Robert Reed. I've been obsessed with a lot of the painters in this book. So it was very natural for me to start kind of almost making a sort of a system of logic on how to group and organize certain areas of the book. And yeah, that process was a very sort of holistic one, working with Echo and working with Thames and Hudson, down to even just like how we organize the chapters. And like what bodies of work go into which chapter. In the beginning of the process, the only thing we knew was that we had these 3 chapters. We have all these different bodies of work, which could really fit in any of the 3 chapters. But like, how can like groupings of images best serve each sort of thesis? And the chapters are like invocation, migration, and liberation. Yeah, I think this was also exciting because I got to play with sort of different material things happening in this book, like this uncoded little cutout like zine moment here, which is just an extracted academic excerpt from, and there's 3 of these throughout the book, and I think this is a really exciting way to kind of share like one, I think it kind of can balance a sort of an intellectual accessibility. I think this book leads with a sort of coffee table sort of quality where like anybody, all ages, can sort of pick it up and there's kind of something there for them. And I think that is really important. And then second, there's like this sort of intellectual layer, kind of when you kind of peel back and go kind of further in, there's these commissioned essays, and there's also these academic extracts here. So I think it's a really sort of rich argument and really richly illustrated with different sort of visual examples. Yeah, and I think some really unique design moments came from this as well, like this spread that's kind of just about black and white and inversion, and also the Miles Davis Bitches Brew album artwork. Yeah, I think this was a really unique project. Yeah, I feel like there's not a lot of books that come around with the sort of ideas that were in this one, so I'm excited I got to articulate this one. And yeah, the process for that was kind of long. This was about a year in the making, but was just released a couple months ago. But yeah, how are we feeling, everyone? Do we want to chat a bit, or I can just jump into the next book? I'm happy to do either.
Scanning the room for hands, eyebrows. Yeah, we have a hand from the line to the back. You might need to like scream it.
Okay. So like a lot of your books are very photograph focused, especially when it's about Black women. So it's like very historic photographs. So how do you feel about manipulating these photos? For example, placing them in a collage. Do you think that's being true to the photograph, or is kind of destroying the history behind them?
Yeah. So I think when working with archival material, the top sort of priority is just preservation of the sort of image you're trying to communicate. I think the context really matters also. So like if an image is important, I would never kind of like for example in for Black women in the vote, I didn't edit really any of those images that were in the portfolio section. I thought the margins were also important. Like I thought the little bits of like a coffee stain in the scan of a photo or something was also important, or like stray marks or something like that. But yeah, to also to go against that, in that same book, like the front inside cover and the back inside cover are literally like a duotone sort of collage of a couple of the images. But you know, the main priority was to make sure those images show up first and foremost in the book and kind of unaltered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you said a couple things related to that, which are really interesting, like the idea of cultural exchange or chemical reactions, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm,
it
mhm.
seems like you're acknowledging that the possibility of creating new, interesting kinds of connections across contexts that might not have otherwise spoken to each other. But then as a counterpoint to that, there's this statement made of let form be form. Do you have some sort of like inner like compass that tells you when you want to use one approach or the other?
Yeah. So yeah, I think totally context matters. I think just right from the jump, when I engage in publication design for it fulfills a larger sort of representational like reparative project that I am trying to sort of be a part of. Outside of publication design, if I'm just doing like you know, like an odd client job for like for example, I work with a lot of artists, some friends, some I don't know initially. Like in some of those playful sort of cases, it might just be a let form be form situation, you know. But if I'm trying to build an object that can echo the values and ideas of a project in book form, then it usually form usually follows history and function and context and all of these other things, you know, and that all dictates the sort of design system.
I think we have a follow-up question in the back from Rebecca Ross, our program director.
Hi.
In relation to what you were just saying, can you say anything about the significance of the medium of the book in particular in relation to the reparative work that you're talking about? What about
Mhm.
it's important in that context?
Yeah, sure. I think books like even kind of withstanding the test of time and like the past 20 years of web kind of taking over, I think books as like as an idea are still extremely accessible, and there's more sort of infrastructure to making sure they remain accessible. Um, like I mean, the institution of libraries, for example, is a huge thing. Like you can check out a book and not pay any money, and you can see all of the resources that are inside of this book, and also see the further reading notes, and then see what resources that book sort of yeah, like you can kind of follow the web, and like the information doesn't necessarily stop. Books also don't tend to have paywalls or login sort of subscription-based models or something, you know. There's usually less barrier of entry for yeah, for knowledge pursuit or something. I think a lot of it is just accessibility.
Well, I would have kind of two thoughts on that. One is I kind of know something of Rebecca's interest, and I wonder if she's also thinking about the role that books can play in public record and the way that like internet and digital media haven't quite caught up to yet. Not that they don't have that possibility. But then also I'm enjoying this kind of dual use of the word accessible, because you talked about it with a book that has a kind of coffee table book vibe, the idea that information or content or culture can be entered on a number of different levels in a single publication, alongside this the sense of like actual physical accessibility. So there's something of like knowledge and physical access kind of tied up here.
Yeah.
Reference to it seems like knowledge is historically in books. And so you're also intervening in the material history of knowledge.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. What does knowledge look like when it's converted to object form or like a measurable unit? Like, I think books might be a good sort of stand-in unit for that. Yeah. Matthew, could you repeat that? What you just said before that like sparked an interesting idea, but it just left my head. Or I'm not sure if that was Matthew, but someone before said something.
I'm the one with the mic, so yeah. What is it something about accessibility or public record? Or...
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think about the concept of accessibility a lot within design, kind of in a sort of poly-pronged way. I think there's like the more conventional sort of almost like the definition that's written in like UX design handbooks or something around how to make sure you know, a website might function properly or have screen reading capabilities, or like the more conventional sort of meanings of accessibility. But I also mean just like social and cultural like forms of accessibility, and like specifically regarding access to information. And I also say that as someone who I think has dealt with that as a gatekeeping sort of mechanism most of my sort of like upbringing and career.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just gonna like look around the room again and see if any of the students want to jump in here.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question. This is Jerome.
Hi, Jerome. How are you?
So, this is just a loose. It's not directly about your work. I'm just curious about your thoughts about this, and maybe also everybody else. I've been reading a lot of PDFs on my phone, actually like scans of books, rather than like buying books because it's easier.
I know that vibe.
So how do you feel about like the future of like, you know what I mean? Not necessarily making blogs, but like considering your books being digitalized, or like, will you consider that in the make of your future books or things like this? Because it isn't a version of accessibility. Like for me right now, it's easier than like going out, buying a stack of books and coming home and reading them.
Yeah, totally. I totally hear that sentiment. Also, like, yeah, I think I can say the same. I have an easier time like getting an ebook than I do getting a physical book right now. can you repeat the main thesis of your question, just like the meat of it?
I'm sorry.
And that'll no, you're
Is
fine.
is it something that you'll consider in the future, or if
Yeah.
no, that's okay too. But
I think it's something I'm definitely considering all the time. I think when you put like books through the tech and like web filter though, it gets really sort of messy ethically. I think the internet is like bogged down with all sorts of issues around like privacy and like literal access issues around like is the internet like a free human right or something, and all of that we've kind of yet to work through. So I think obviously it makes pragmatically speaking, without any sort of like social factors at play, I think the easiest way to consume things would totally be on a screen or something. But I think, you know, I think I'm also the peak demographic that is of the age to be receptive to that. And it's the hard, and it's like hard right now, even for like my group or my demographic. I can't really imagine, you know, like my grandma or something having a reading relationship with an e-reader or a Kindle or something. But I think those are things that will change. But yeah, we have like ethical things to also move through with web and big tech. And yeah. Thank you for that question, Jerome. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question real quick. So you mentioned that when you design, you try to design without drifting away into the realm of, you know, watering down the message of the images or the message of the writer that the book is trying to, you know, provide with the book. So the question here is, how do you kind of define your own design practice and, you know, navigate through those different kind of realms of, you know, what the book writer wants to say, or what the message is in the images, because, you know, these images have been photographed by, you know, different people, and there's a different message that they portray. So how do you kind of, you know, direct your own practice through that? Yeah,
I mean, realistically speaking, you try your hardest or something, but there's a lot of factors at play. There's, like you said, what the writer or editor is interested in conveying, like if it's a project with artists or like essay illustrations or like plates or something like that, then you're gonna have to deal with maybe like artist permissions or something. And then on top of that, you're also dealing with publishers and what at the end of the day, like there's a filter on you know, what a book can look like coming out of a major publisher that has fixed ideas around what a high-selling mass market trade book should look like or something. All of those factors kind of play a role. And yeah, it's a lot. I mean, design is a lot about communication and also just like talking through those conversations and like almost trying to advocate to get other people out of their comfort zones, or, you know, like, yeah, I think designers that work in client work sort of contexts can also feel like a sort of like therapist or something. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, those are a couple books that I wanted to sort of talk through real quick. Now I have a couple sort of projects that stem from visual identity sort of projects. So there's a couple here, and this first one I'm excited to share about. I haven't really talked about this one or made this one too public yet, and we're still kind of like unveiling this visual identity, but I'm not going to specifically touch too much on the visual identity, but I do want to talk about the font modification I made. And so this, the visual identity was made in collaboration with a close colleague of mine, Riley Hooker. And the font modification was just done by me. It was called, we're calling it Bauhaus and Sabidi. And I guess the thing we were sort of thinking about with Yardy World was they're an avant-garde sort of like food and production studio and like event studio in New York. Their founder is Devon Francis of Yardy World, also on like outlets like Bon Appetit and things like that. And so yeah, Yardy World is Devon's like brainchild of years in the making. And like Devon is like a performance artist and a chef and does all of these sort of like polyhyphenate things. We wanted a sort of flexible identity that at once could maybe hit the value sort of check marks that like a New York food sort of event service might need to have or something, or might need to be in conversation with. But then we also wanted to, again, sort of have this conversation around like cultural exchange or dialogue or something like that. And the vessel we primarily used was the typography, and mainly the typeface here, which is I'm sure many of you are familiar, the canonized sort of modernist classic Bauhaus, the geometric sans serif. We set that as their primary typeface, but we also we made a lot of tweaks to it, and we also married it with this like larger sort of glyph palette and visual language of like Afro-diasporic writing systems, things that are directly influenced from like West African systems like Nsibidi, or like cosmograms, or like things from like Haitian ground drawings, and just kind of thinking throughout the diaspora, but like loose, but like also, yeah, I want to note that we approached it kind of loosely and from a space of play. I think it's kind of an interesting sort of cultural dialogue for a Caribbean food and sort of creative studio to use this typeface that is like hailed as a modernist classic when it's just kind of about also geometric forms, and then add something to it that doesn't necessarily add contrast, but really just harmonizes it. And I'll show you a bit of these symbols here. We have their brand symbols here. A lot of these are kind of specific to like the brand needs, like website sort of icons and stuff, made as actual just glyphs that you can type. And then we have like specific things that are specific icons that come from like, that are meal sharing related or like communion related. And those were kind of the themes, like meeting around a table, meeting around food and drink. The vibe is always like a sort of social thing. Like it's like Yardy World and the food and whoever else is kind of in conversation. And so I'm going to jump to some of these more overt symbols here. You can see just like some of these marks, we didn't take a lot of creative liberty here, and I think that's important. My hand doesn't really show up in these translations too much. I was going off of records found on like JSTOR articles for like for Nsibidi writing marks, or like the Haitian ground drawings. Or for example, there's another example in a book I have over in my library, Flash of the Spirit by Robert Ferris Thompson. And he talks a lot about some of these writing traditions as well too. But yeah, I think the exciting part about this sort of union of like modernity and like pre/post-modernity / anti-modernity, or like antithesis of modernity or something, is how well like these two things mended or something. You can see, yeah, you can see like in the text how sort of natural it looks, like the sentence that says "let's eat." These forms really kind of want to be in conversation, sort of the sharp edges and the natural angles and the easy circles and almost like proportionate divisions in a lot of this stuff. And then, you know, we also drew like punctuation. I think outside of the Afro writing sort of inspiration, we also just really had fun redrawing the ampersand. I think this one down here is really my favorite. We gave them alternates as well. And yeah, it's sort of like a really playful language that I don't think this sort of history or this like cultural dialogue or tension is at the forefront of the system, which I think is good. And I think it leads with a sort of play. But I think it's really also just a very nuanced sort of identity that can like that I think we can riff off for a while as well, and also just expand upon. So I'm really excited about that as a project, and also just excited about font design and font modification as a whole. I think that's a space that I'm starting to really kind of really fall into these days. But also just for like, I think font design is a really interesting technology, and is at that intersection of like language and culture and technology. And yeah, I think it like this time period in general feels like almost like the Wild West or something for font design, and also just a lot of like tech-based sort of like workflows and processes. I think we're at the crux of this sort of exponential curve with technology, and I'm excited to sort of interface with computers differently in the future or something. Here's another visual identity project that I think is interesting. I haven't shared this one too much as well. It was made while this one was not a result of my own independent design studio, but was while I was full-time at a creative agency called Ghost Note. And I was the lead designer on a rebrand for a Smithsonian museum called Anacostia Community Museum, or ACM for short. And ACM, this is the logo. This is sort of where they came from, and this is where we landed. Yeah, I think to preface, I think a good chunk of this project was rushed in a way that I wouldn't rush it if I ran my own studio. But I think like this brick mark is kind of the main sort of dynamic piece of the puzzle here. And I think puzzle is a fun word to kind of use too. You can see a bit of the brick logic here. It's like a modular system, and it's directly inspired by it's sort of what I'm now calling, I think a good way to describe it is like it's inspired by like the Afrocentrism of like a historic DC neighborhood that is Anacostia, and like overtly kind of directly inspired by their wall sort of brick facade that they have here, which is kind of in the shape of like this Afrocentric kente cloth design. I believe it was made in the 70s. Before, this museum was the first community museum in the country. It wasn't always owned by Smithsonian as well. So there was this like, I think really sort of communal sort of sense of pride around this building and like this space as a meeting place. And also like during that time period, I think a lot of that pride got like distilled into what you see in the brick facades. And I think the gesture of kind of looping back to that facade isn't necessarily about the kente cloth, but it's more so about this history of community coming together and building things together, like these bricks that are kind of coming together like a pyramid or something. I think the typeface is also kind of interesting. I've been wanting to use the typeface for a bit. It's called Redaction. It's designed by Forrest Young. He's at Wolf Olins. He's a famous Black graphic designer. Designed by Wolf Olin or Jeremy. Yes, the name I just said, and there was one other name. I think his name starts with Jeremy, but I forget. Yeah, Forrest Young and Jeremy somebody. But I think the typeface is really interesting because it has these like different weights. It goes from like super heavy black with like all these ink traps in it, and as you go from the blackest weight down to the other end of the spectrum, on the other side of that axis is pixelation and censorship. And yeah, there's like this history that the typeface was built off of, kind of stemming from like, well, it was made on the occasion of Titus Kafar's MoMA PS1 show with the same name called Redaction. and yeah, kind of telling the story of like censorship or erasure in the civil rights sort of process historically in America. And so, yeah, all the instances we use in this sort of in this brand identity are just like the version with the ink trap. But I think it's also just exciting to see a Black typeface travel and like its story maybe shift over time and also take on the role of like from MoMA PS1 show to museum branding now or something, you know. And those are also the sort of stories that I love and think design has the capability to tell sort of over time. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that is all of my case studies. I'm happy to jump back to anything and we can talk through any other projects in detail, or happy to talk through anything else you all might have on your mind. Thank you guys though.
Sure, that's just the first many rounds of applause to come. Thanks, Rush.
Thank you.
Looking out to the room first to see if we have any immediate urgent questions. Also, of course, happy to take them from the online audience. Wow, they're Lawrence again. Yeah, go for it.
I think there's some sort of tension between using like Roman alphabets, like English letters, and like African writing systems.
Sorry, I think I have heard you. What was your question?
Do you want me to try to paraphrase that, Lauren?
Because a lot of your work is very, like, the focus is a lot on typefaces. Do you think there is some sort of tension between, like, using a typeface to communicate Black heritage and Black pride, and having typefaces be in Roman alphabets, like English letters?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't think when I use a typeface by a Black designer, the goal is to have it communicate Black pride. I think it's I think we also like all of when we kind of practice design, I think we also like our biggest project is sort of the blueprint or like rubric of how we practice design. I think I think a lot of these definitions and ideas around design practice are really kind of like mutable and like not fixed. And I think it's also, a designer's sort of job to show like, hey, these are the ways in which you can practice design that aren't in the context of like, I don't know, like maybe just using Google fonts in an unsort of thoughtful way, or using stock, I don't know, just some of these more kind of conventional and like quick and commodified sort of ways and workflows of practicing design, I think say more about capitalism than I think they do graphic design practice. And I think it's the biggest thing a graphic designer can do is not have a good portfolio, but also just have a good track record of how they move through the world and how they practice the sort of the field of study.
I have to say, I love this kind of, when you talk about how we practice design, I love that it's actually skirting to the side of formal considerations a bit. It's actually talking about some of the relevant context and some of the ways that you might exercise a sense of ethics and values through practice.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's all graphic design is. I see it largely as like a sort of language creation exercise, but also like this value assignment sort of practice. And I think a lot of that value assignment can be like an implicit sort of thing that isn't necessarily, at the forefront of a lot of designers' minds. But I think by it not being at the forefront, we reinforce a lot of harmful ideas around design and a lot of harmful ideas around value, visual culture, people's worth, etc. Yeah, I think, and for a while, like I think I resented design culture pretty heavily while I was like learning it, kind of outside of like academic models, just merely because like I was kind of really on the other side of that gate and feeling the sort of the lack of access for a while. I mean, the only sort of difference from like, yeah, I think a big noticeable difference between my practice now and back then is just like, I'm going to hold back on that thought. Let me jump to another question, actually. Also, I just wanted to jump to one other thing too that I forgot in my notes here. I wanted to quickly talk about like research and like information management. I think, and I think giving a disclaimer also before this is good too, but my thoughts around like tech and like information management and like automation and everything have no alignment to values around like productivity culture or like getting things done or movements or whatever. I'm coming from a place of, I think practicing design as an independent designer in 2022 is largely unsustainable for like financial and labor and self-care reasons, as a single individual, especially. But I think there are ways to get around that. And a big chunk of what I spend my time on now is like almost designing systems of like automation for smaller tasks that I do. I don't tend to automate communication. I think that is something that humans should do. But like things like task managers and calendars that can save you the headache of finding an event or something like that, or also like things as complex as like Illustrator scripts or Photoshop actions or Apple Automator scripts that can do like full sort of processes or workflows for you in multiple applications. Things like that I'm really excited by. And also the potential to like, I don't know, maybe share a bit of my findings as I sort of progress onwards and make that a bit more open source. Yeah, I think I don't think also like, you know, Adobe Creative Cloud subscriptions should be I don't think that should be a requirement to having to practice design or being in this field. I don't think we should all be paying a weird and strangely powerful and kind of violent monopoly. And I think designers are a great class of people that can find other alternatives and design their own systems around a lot of these things. Yeah.
It made me think like what you're describing is almost like in place of the kind of fear of automation, you're putting in the kind of power of bionics, almost like to
Right.
design, right? Like it's actually to amplify something that you already do rather than to outsource it to technology.
Yeah, I love that word too, bionics, in relation to thinking about this. And for context, I'm like totally the type of person, like I was born to a single mom who had me on the computer at the age of like whatever, super young. She was predominantly working, and like the computer became an extension of like my brain and body up to like now. And yeah, I totally think of like technology as like a transhuman sort of like bio extension or something like that, you know, like this is actually bionics or something. And it's also about figuring out how to, yeah, I don't know, work through systems to make people's life easier and give them more access and autonomy of systems like that, but also like sharing those systems with others. Yeah.
Scanning the room again, looking for Devin, yeah.
Is there software and or tools that you recommend outside of Adobe?
Software and or tools that I'm excited by?
outside of Adobe? Was that the question?
Outside of Adobe, yeah. I liked Figma until Adobe bought it. I'm excited by like some of the Omni apps, if you've heard of them, like Omni. What is it? There's Omni Focus and Omni Plan and Omni Outliner and Omni Graphel, and all of those things. Like Omni Graphel, I think is really exciting. If y'all have seen the HBO show The Rehearsal, the main character is just on this computer making all these flowcharts in real time or something, and that's Omni Graphel, and you can plug in your own automations and you can make these complex sort of workflows that are unimaginable, frankly, in a Adobe tech environment. And yeah, I think I lean towards software that allows you to, like, I'm just kind of getting into Obsidian right now as a general sort of like data management and sort of like notes, sort of like note keeper and management system. I like how you can change everything down to just like opening up the CSS and editor inside or something. And the community plugins are really cool. And yeah, things that have like open source sort of qualities I really like. And I'm also thinking of, if y'all are aware of the book Caps Lock by Ruben Pater, there's a chapter at the end, I think called like solutions or something like that, or like possibly using like different design groups as case studies for the solutions for a capitalist problem, like squeezing design that Ruben describes. And there's this one studio that only uses open source software. I'm forgetting the name right now. I will have to loop back, but I know you can find it in the last chapter of Caps Lock. But yeah, I think they're a great thread for further reading also, whatever that studio is. I think they're based somewhere in Central America. But yeah.
Hey. Hey, Raj. It's Human.
Hi.
Hey. So my question is about, I guess specifically the new Black Vanguard book. And I was interested in, I guess, how you used images in that book. Because, you know, there were, I guess some of them are commissioned for various contexts. I don't know, like, for example, fashion shoot for a magazine or a personal project. And then, so they come from those contexts, and then you're bringing them into a different context. And I guess you could maybe, I'd be interested to hear about your process of, I guess, working with images, given that they come from that.
Yeah, so for the new Black Vanguard specifically, Aperture was kind of mostly in control. The publisher Aperture was mostly kind of overseeing a lot of the like image collection and like management. Where we came in, I think, was like assembling portfolios, like with these 15 artists kind of deciding what images maybe might be the most important, and like how we set up a portfolio or sort of like a system of like plate pages that can accommodate whatever sort of vast context these images are coming from. Like, for example, we might have like text that might say like, here's the model, the stylist, the shoot, the kind of campaign, the year, etc. And almost giving it more of like a sort of like archival documentation sort of sort of captioning style, something that can change depending on what the image is. Some of them are just like personal projects that the artists have that might not have been commissioned for a you know, like an overt fashion thing. But yeah, a lot of this you see a lot of the brand names kind of connected to these images, which I think is interesting, you know. Yeah, really watching how intellectual property works.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm also happy to answer questions around just like the logistics of design practice or being an independent designer, anything like that. Yeah, I think I practice a sort of more conventional or more unconventional sort of model of design compared to a lot of my peers and friends that I see. I have a close network of friends that are also just like independent designer, freelancer folks, but you know, a lot of designers end up preferring to work with like larger design firms or something like that. So yeah, I think I have a lot of experience outside of that world.
Yeah, Leo and that.
I brought you to Tumblr, and my second I would sort of inspire you when you were younger. And sort of, I'm also part of the Tumblr generation, staying the downfall of Tumblr, essentially makes me wonder whether choosing the book as the medium you're working with is kind of a way of taking ownership of the media. Because Tumblr had so many resources for British people, but now it's not what it was. So all of these information work is lost.
Would you mind paraphrasing that? I heard parts of it, but you dropped out in certain areas.
Do you want to run up to the front, or should I try to paraphrase?
Yeah.
So he was talking about being from the Tumblr generation and it being an important site of like information, stuff, images specifically relevant to the queer community. Is that what you were saying?
Mm-hmm.
Missing the next part of the question.
So,
Then.
it's like, I think it's really interesting what Leo's asking. He's saying like, is the interest in the form of the book sort of like an answer to the fact that like when Tumblr starts saying like, you can't have this kind of content, you can't have that kind of content, actually like, there's no sort of like singular authority in that way in relation to books. There are sites in which certain books are censored, for sure. But then, and the books don't, it's like same thing with Figma, I guess. Like Adobe can't buy like, Google can try, but Adobe can't buy like all the books, right?
Yeah. I think
Elon Musk can.
Elon Musk definitely can. He might actually, I don't know, he just bought Twitter. He might want to chill out for a bit. Yeah, I think, you know, actually maybe even the opposite. I think Tumblr for me, and my recollection of it, was a really great and kind of exciting example of like online spaces that felt maybe like more free and expressive, and maybe that had the capacity for like longer form sharing. I think maybe that was a good example for me, like in my teen years, and then like as I approach book design, I think that was maybe a sort of subconscious want, like a sort of books as this vessel for like, okay, like this online platform is gone, Instagram is nowhere near it in its structure, and the algorithm promotes conflict. So what can we do with books or something? I think, that could have been at play, yeah.
Your 6% battery is giving me anxiety. So you know.
Sorry, what'd you say?
I said your 6% battery, no, now it's 5% battery level is really making me anxious.
I've had this charger in my hand for like 10 minutes now.
Okay, I feel better now. It's
Thank
like
you so
playing
much.
chicken. When were you even plugged in?
If you didn't remind me, maybe I wouldn't have.
Hey, Rush, can I ask a question? Another question?
Yeah,
Go for it, Jerome.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to do the elevator pitch about who your work is for, or like the two-liner manifesto of your practice, what would that be?
Oh God, yeah. I would not be good at that at all. I think I already spent my 2 sentences. I think, like above everything, I like using design as like I like using design as a sort of vessel for like almost like collaborative and cultural sort of play. I think like a lot of the modes of like sharing and being that I grew up experiencing, like skateboarding and film photography, and to like even like the participating in like the Philly music DIY scene or whatever. I think all of that kind of had a role in, I don't know. Yeah, I would say I would say I prioritize people over like the studio prioritizes people over like maybe corporations or, you know, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say two sentences without sounding like some weird like one page creative studio microsite call to action, you know. That's a good, I don't know if I could distill anything down to two sentences.
Well, thanks. I think I got it.
Cool. Yeah, happy to try for you. Also, am I frozen? I feel like I can't see myself, but if y'all can still hear me, I think we're good. Okay. Okay.
I mean, I guess if I were to kind of come to your defense there, Rush, there's something about the way that you, in your work and also the way you talk about your practice, you have a really fluid relationship to symbols and signs in a way that I find really refreshing. And I think maybe we have certain fears as graphic designers in the way that we engage with symbols and signs as
Yeah.
really fixed weighty meaning that we have to actually like concede authority to. And you seem to be willing to be like, yeah, no, I'm gonna use it for something else, right? And you just change meaning and adapt meaning as you go.
Right, right. And I think that's something that is a natural like sort of quality of language. I'm definitely like in the not the prescriptivist, the descriptivist camp of sociolinguistics, I would say. Like I think meanings naturally change over time, all the time. And yeah, like literally when I was born, the odds were people would call me African American versus now majority of folks are calling me Black or something. Shout out Bill Clinton. But like that sort of thinking, you know, like meaning is constantly in flux, and I think Black language really embraces that, where other sort of forms of language might feel more rigid. This is something I think I've also maybe articulated more in like some of my video work and not so much in maybe design practice. But yeah, something I think about a lot.
You can also see an easy relationship there to gender nonconformity to sort of occupying queer identities in a really kind of fluid way.
Right, right. Yeah, just yeah, acknowledging the world as a condition of being constantly in a state of flux or something. That reminds me of a poster. It was like a Huey Newton quote from his speech at Boston College. A friend of mine, G. Wesley, who was a part of this bookshop in Philly called Ulysses. They had these posters made that was like a quote from Huey Newton, kind of just giving a preface before his speech, kind of just stating that before I go into anything, I just want you to know that like everything is constantly in a state of flux. They're like our ideas around the world are constantly changing and will be constantly changing, and I need you to all kind of be there in that headspace, kind of with me. That's like I feel like that's really kind of formative to a lot of my thinking.
That's really nice. Thanks. Looking around for last questions from the room. Maybe we should leave it there on that really beautiful note. Thank you, Rush.
Yeah, thank you all. It's been such a pleasure. Cool. Well, cheers, y'all.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Rush. I'm gonna say to the room, don't forget, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back here, joined by our next lecturer, Poi Flynn, who's sort of somewhere at the margins of the space. You might run into her. Thank you for everyone who participated online, and that's it for now.
Thanks, everyone. If you'd like to follow me or keep up with me, I'm at Rush Jackson Studio on Instagram or rushjackson.com. Cheers, y'all. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.